Selling a little or a lot? Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your own online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage? Shopify's there to help you grow. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout. 36% better on average compared to the other leading commerce platforms. Because businesses that grow, grow with Shopify. Get a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo. Shopify.com/promo.
It's August 20th, 1940, and another remarkable event is about to be uncovered by Arion, Rebecca, and Olly, the Retrospectors.
Winston Churchill had only been Prime Minister for 3 months, but today in history in 1940, he gave one of his most iconic speeches. Almost 1 year into World War II, he took to the floor of the House of Commons, paying tribute to the bravery of the RAF pilots charged with keeping the German Luftwaffe at bay during the Battle of Britain, and uttered these lines. I'm not going to do the impersonation. Never in the field, but imagine the jowls. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few.
Yeah, and his speech actually lasted nearly 50 minutes, and it began with this long section about how there had actually been fewer casualties than at the same point in the First World War, which was so like the act of a politician trying to dress a terrible failure or like hideous moment up as a success. He was like, look, we've only had kind of 90,000 people die or get captured as opposed to 300,000 which were dead at this same stage in World War I. But through all of this, this was only one single part of a really long speech that was trying to say, look, things haven't necessarily gone well. We know what's coming. We need to steel ourselves, but also we're well prepared for what's to come.
Unlike all of Churchill's speeches, if you have heard it delivered by him, you're hearing a special recording that he made of it because he was making all of these speeches, all the famous ones he made in the House of Commons. There was no recording equipment at the time. There was no, BBC Parliament to watch proceedings live. So the closest that the average person would actually have got to hearing it would have been extracts that might have been read out by a news presenter on the radio or reading a transcript in the newspaper the next day. The only one of his major wartime speeches to actually be broadcast by him to the nation was the Finest Hour one, which he made 2 weeks later. But again, that wasn't him doing it in the House of Commons. He repeated it that evening as a live radio broadcast based on how well all the previous speeches had been received.
Yeah, and it's strange because it like the quote. I mean, this speech is called the few speech, right? The quote is never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. That's the quote. But as Arion said, it's a really long speech, which I've never read in full until today. And this quote is bang in the middle of it. It's not the rabble-rousing finale, which is something else. At the end, he talks about broader lands and better days and roll on, which was obviously intended to be a phrase that stuck, but didn't. This one, it is just chucked away in the middle, as if it's a normal bit of speech writing. Let's catch up to where we're up to on the war, folks. And then there's just this brilliant bit of rhetoric in the middle.
And I think it's also really telling that the part of the speech which is best remembered today is this tribute to the fighter pilots, because the fighter pilots were the extreme minority of the RAF. If you think about it, bombers need entire crews. So obviously many more airmen are going to be in those bombers. And actually in the speech, Churchill devoted more lines to the bomber squadrons, and they're actually phrased in a way that kind of addresses the fact that they are that little bit harder to idolize, because at the end of the day, they are dropping bombs on people on the ground. Some of those people are obviously going to be civilian casualties, no matter how careful the bombing runs are. And he devotes quite a lot of the speech to saying, this is really hard, courageous work. They're taking fire from German anti-aircraft. They're doing this precision bombing. Almost trying to make it more comfortable for people to appreciate what the bomber squadrons are doing as well as the fighters in the air. But even so, history has shown that the part of the speech that would always stand out would be the image of the fighter pilots and the dogfights with the Luftwaffe above Britain.
Well, one of the reasons why it's regarded as a particularly important speech was perhaps because it was more clearly aimed at British ears than We Shall Fight Them on the Beaches, which itself is, both rousing and iconic in the same way as this one. But both of these speeches weren't the immediate kind of morale booster that we imagine, and particularly the way they're depicted in the films of Churchillian oratory, where everyone bursts into applause, because quite a lot of what he is delivering is pretty depressing. What he's saying is this war is going not terribly well. This was just after Dunkirk, after all, and this is at the moment where Britain is really conscious that what's about to come is Hitler bringing his army machine to British shores. And I think that was really significant, that here what he's saying is no longer about reaching Roosevelt and saying, please, would you come and join us? It's about saying, listen, here comes Hitler. We have to be ready, and we have to support our airmen as they defend us from the skies.
Yeah, because the Germans were, as he acknowledges in this speech, as you're saying, is quite depressing on the surface. The Germans are outnumbering the Brits at this point in the skies. They had 750 long-range and 250 dive bombers, 600 single-engined and 150 twin-engine fighters, significantly more than the RAF, who had 600 fighter command planes. And this was genuinely unprecedented. There had never been a military campaign fought entirely in the air before. So, I mean, he's sort of saying both things in this, isn't it? Which is what's interesting. We're in a bad situation, folks, but we're going to win. He let people believe they were going to win.
And, the power of words was something that Churchill really understood throughout his entire life. But actually, speaking publicly didn't come very naturally to Churchill, and he had to overcome a certain amount of ridicule in his youth about his speech impediment. And he always worked incredibly hard on the speeches that he presented. And in the end, he sort of came through with the kinds of things that we're familiar with, but it always took him a lot of work. His speeches weren't off the cuff. They were regarded as being the product of both preparation and practice.
Yeah, they were painstakingly constructed. He later estimated that each minute of a speech took him roughly an hour to compose. And each one was also typed out for him to refer to in a layout designed to reflect the cadence that he wanted to be speaking with. So if you look at the originals that he had in front of him when he was giving...
It looks like poetry, doesn't it?
Yeah, it looks like abstract poetry. A lot of analyses of Churchill's speeches have pointed out that he uses a lot of Anglo-Saxon words, it's usually a euphemism for swear words when people say that, but an Anglo-Saxon lexicon full of short, simple, but powerful words that anyone could follow. That's another part of it. Some of the oratory is quite highfalutin and using a lot of long words, but a lot of it is stuff that is short, sharp words that would stick in the average person's brain.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you could listen to it as the common man and pick up the thrust of what he means through the momentum and the rhetoric and the rhythm and the cadence. But then you get a word, like in the final sentence. Did he say benignance? I think he says. No one ever uses that word.
Well, the funny thing is that his phraseology had a way of catching on. All of the RAF pilots who flew in the Battle of Britain came to be known as and to refer to themselves as the few.
Well, I suppose that mentality was important when you consider the hideous ratio of these young men. They were young men. The average age of an RAF pilot then was 22, that was either killed or wounded. So the few really was the few. It was around 3,000 servicemen, and of those number, 1 in 3 died doing their job.
And the effect of this incredible run of speeches, not just this, it started with the blood, toil, tears and sweat speech. That was his first address as Prime Minister in the House of Commons. We shall fight them on the beaches, finest hour. The effect can't be underestimated, not just on the national spirit, I mean, everybody knows that, but also as a redemption arc for Churchill himself. We're looking back at him as the World War II, hero prime minister, but he had come to office a really divisive figure, even within the Conservative Party, associated with his off-puttingly strident views on labour unions and Indian self-rule. He was very against both, and he'd often been depicted in the 1930s as kind of a Colonel Blimp figure, an arrogant windbag with a kind of Victorian view of Britain, and he had spent the 1930s out of office, what he called his wilderness period. He was an early anti-appeasement voice as well, when the Chamberlain government was pursuing a policy of appeasement towards Nazi Germany. And although obviously in later years that stance would be vindicated massively, at the time it looked like, just the same old warmongering from a 19th century dinosaur. But in the end, it was precisely that ultra-conservative view of Britain that would really resonate in the speeches.
Yeah, and that anti-appeasement streak in him led to one of his many famous quotes, which was, "An appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile hoping it will eat him last." And he was just full of this. You know, he had so many great and quotable things to say throughout his entire time in politics, including, I loved, "Don't interrupt me while I'm interrupting." It's just great.
And it's weird, isn't it, given that this was actually such a long speech in reality, that basically just because of that one quotation, that one sentence, the speech sits alongside Blood, Toil, Tears and Sweat and We Shall Fight Them on the Beaches and the Iron Curtain and all the other things he said, even to the extent that the time it was delivered, the exact time it was delivered, 1552, has been commemorated on this day in flypasts and stuff. They've had like an actor B. Churchill at 1552 delivering this speech as Spitfires fly over.
Yeah, and then the impersonator starts talking about his opposition to self-rule in India and they have to hurry him off the stage.
Yeah, he doesn't get to that till 9 p.m. They're all tanked up on Spitfire and London Pride.
Now,
This episode first aired last year exclusively to members of Club Retrospectors.
Join today and unlock a new episode this Sunday.
Patreon.com/Retrospectors.
I'm historian Ruth Goodman, host of Noise's newest podcast, The Curious History of Your Home. I've spent my life investigating the hidden history of everyday objects. The vacuum cleaner in your cupboard, sleek and compact today, but when it was invented, it was literally powered by horses and took 4 to 6 people to operate. The minty fresh toothpaste by your sink. Well, if you lived in ancient Greece, you'd be washing your teeth with ground-up bones and oyster shells. Double-glazed windows? We owe those to a French king's odd fascination with oranges. The Curious History of Your Home explores the extraordinary in the ordinary. Listen to The Curious History of Your Home each Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. From award-winning podcasters Noiser, The Curious History of Your Home.